Hi everyone. I want to do a video today on gut health. It felt like a little too long to share on social media, so I want to kind of break this down. A lot of people have heard the term SIBO. It's SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth. What this means is that there is an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut that has gotten to a point where it is causing symptoms, meaning that the gut can't really keep it in check anymore. The gut is made and designed to be able to constantly be assessing what's going on and also to respond in a way that allows balance and health. When something happens in the gut that causes a compromise to that system, that's when things start to overgrow or undergrow, and that's when things start to become more symptomatic. So, what does this mean? So, SIBO again gets diagnosed by actually a couple different ways, but one of the most common ways is something called a breath test. So, you're breathing into a tube at certain intervals, timing wise, and what we're looking at is there a specific doubling at specific points or exponential growth of the production of methane or hydrogen or both from this breath test? And if there is, then there becomes a diagnosis of SIBO. And that's it. And then it's typically treated with antibiotics, pretty heavy hitting antibiotics. If you are working with someone who's more integrative or natural leaning, you might use supplements, and there's a whole host of supplements that are used for this. So there are different treatments, conventionally and more integrative kind of approach. However, both of these approaches are working with this very general diagnosis that there's an overgrowth of bacteria. However, it could really be missing some other pieces of the puzzle that would help us have a much more direct and impactful treatment protocol based on exactly what's going on in your gut. So, what do I mean by this? So, for one example here, you could have this overgrowth of bacteria, but the question is why, right? Because if we don't figure out the why, a lot of times you're going to get a return of symptoms. So, one of the reasons why you might have bacterial overgrowth is perhaps from a very early age you've had gut imbalances. One reason could be if you were born via C-section or bottle fed or both. That means that we know from the literature that there's a compromise to the gut microbiome. So the gut is meant to keep things in check. It knows what to do. The only time there becomes an issue is when there is something that is so impactful that it can't do that any longer. So one of those things is it just might not have had the right balance of good bacteria to begin with, and the gut lining itself might not have had the most supported start. So you could have inflammation of the gut lining, and you could have an undergrowth of good bacteria and overgrowth of bad bacteria. The lining of the gut is very important in maintaining balance. So if you have an irritated lining of your gut, it's like a skin knee. I give this example a lot. So let's say you have a skin knee. Okay, this is a wrist, but just look at the example here. So let's say it's irritated and raw. If I touch your knee, it's gonna hurt. But this touching isn't the cause of the pain, right? So sometimes people are eating food or they just have pain all day, and it might not actually be the food that's the problem. Everything's going to feel irritated if you have a skin knee. And the other thing is, if it continues to stay raw, at some point there becomes more infection or perhaps an inability to heal because the immune system is just kind of taxed. So that can happen with the lining of the gut if that's where the issue is, if there's an irritation. So that can happen, like I said, from early development and exposure of gut issues in childhood. That can also come from stressors, childhood, adulthood. If you're very stressed for long periods of time, you release these immune reactions out of the gut. That's what it's programmed to do. There's something going on, I've got to respond, and it releases an immune response. However, over time, if that immune response is going on for a long time, the gut starts to get tired, or it starts to not be able to continue to maintain the amount of demand that the body is requiring from this mental stress. That also can lead to kind of a downstream effect of more frustration, depression, anxiety, because the gut produces about 90% of our serotonin. So there's that kind of connection there. But back to SIBO, or back to gut imbalances. Another thing is you could just have exposure to a pathogen that is a high level, and no matter how healthy the gut is, it could be kind of tipped over. So some of these things could be you're traveling, you get food poisoning because you're exposed to certain kinds of bacteria or pathogens. Another thing is maybe you had like strep frequently as a kid or even in adulthood. That strep bacteria could grow to a point where the gut just can't keep it in check, and it's got this low grade growth going on in the gut. I see strep a lot. Another thing is you could have had different procedures in a hospital or healthcare setting that exposed you to bacteria, because we actually have a fairly high amount of infections that happen just from being in a healthcare environment. So a lot of people I see have various bacteria that can be more related to being in a healthcare setting. Those are some major kinds of exposure. Another exposure I want to talk about is something called H. pylori. So H. pylori is really common. A lot of people carry it. Not everyone is symptomatic. H. pylori is very difficult to treat in the conventional model. They give you 2 different antibiotics usually, and they're not always that effective or successful for everyone. So H. pylori can be found in a host of different environments. It is commonly found in environments where there might be farms, like especially with cows. So people who've grown up on dairy farms or on land where there were dairy farms or cattle farms, even near them, that's pretty common. The other thing is H. pylori can be passed by family members or partners, because, you share a lot of different, saliva and, things that in the home that it can expose each other. And if there's an environment that takes hold, then you could have an overgrowth. The environment that H. pylori thrives in is very unique. And what it is it actually can grow in the stomach acid and in the stomach. So a lot of people start to get things like heartburn, and the common treatment is what? It's to suppress the stomach acid, thinking there's too much acid. The problem here is that that's actually the opposite of what's going on. Usually H. pylori thrives in an environment where there's low stomach acid. And so if we suppress that even further, what we're going to get is an even more hospitable environment for H. pylori. So the problem is, when people have low stomach acid, a lot of time that is from stress or maybe foods that are not jiving with the body. And so it causes wear and tear on the digestive tract because the body's inflamed. So, food sensitivity can certainly lead to these imbalances because it causes an environment that can't keep up with the demand of what needs to be balanced. You get these symptoms like bloating, you get heartburn, you can get acne, skin issues, rosacea, anxiety, fatigue, constipation, diarrhea. These are very common. One of the specific kind of take-home messages is that H. pylori actually, even in the integrative world, it has a very specific treatment protocol that I use, and it is not the same protocol that I use for pretty much all the other bacterial overgrowth, because it actually needs its own treatment. So when I see both H. pylori and other bacteria show up on a gut test, I actually have 2 different phases we go through. And that's important because the difference is when you do a SIBO test, you're looking at these breath patterns of what's showing up. Is it hydrogen exponentially growing, methane exponentially growing, or both? And then again, even in the conventional and integrative worlds, they're really using kind of cookie cutter treatment just based on the term SIBO. But what we can do with a gut test, you get a kit sent to your house, you send a little poop off to the lab, and they look at what's going on. Is there bacteria? Is there viruses? Is there H. pylori? Is there parasites or worms? Are there decrease in digestive enzymes? That's going to be a problem right there, because you're not able to break the food down. The food goes in a big molecule. It then can cause wear and tear on the lining of the gut, and you even get something called leaky gut, because you get the junctions of the lining of the gut too big, and then the food can kind of go out into the bloodstream. So we need to take a multifaceted approach often. Does the lining of the gut need some treatment? There's specific tools I use for that. Do we need to kill off bacteria? There's specific tools for that. Do we need to kill off parasites or worms? There's different tools for that. Is H. pylori present? There's different tools for that. Are there markers that show that you have a sensitivity to foods? Is there markers that show a sensitivity to gluten? We have those all in this one same gut test. So I usually try to kind of get as far as I can with people with gut symptoms, because, I try to save people the cost of a gut test. But for what it is and for what we get, it's pretty effective and pretty worth the money for a lot of people who've been struggling, buying a million different supplements, feeling miserable. So one of the things we can do is do a really good intake and figure out where might these points in your life story have happened that might have exposed you or caused a situation where you weren't able to regulate the gut. That's where I start, and then we can kind of, go from there. However, If we hit walls, if we can't find particularly pinpointed information, or if you're just sick of going down these roads of trying things, we can always do a gut test. The gut test gives us an incredible amount of information, and it allows us to really pinpoint and target our treatment protocols based on what's showing up. And it's usually more than one thing. So sometimes there's low enzymes. We need to bring that on. We need to help the stomach acid get more produced. And maybe we need to fight off strep and H. pylori. So that might be like a 2 or 3 part series. So if you're interested in learning more, you can always go to the website www.northstarholisticmedicine. We can do a discovery call. We can get you going on an intake visit and even get the gut test ordered before your visit so we can just dive right in. If you have questions, drop them below. I'm happy to answer.